perpetuate contemporary colonial erasure and violence. So with that in our mind, we are really grateful to be able to live and carry out our work for GCSC and for UNAC Vancouver here on the unceded and ancestral and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. But acknowledging that oceans are all around us, water is all around us, and as well as this being a webinar, I really want to extend that gratitude to all Indigenous peoples across Canada who've been protecting our oceans and waterways since time out of mind and continue to do that today. We have so much to learn from Indigenous frontline water defenders, and I really encourage us to listen more than we talk and to put what we learn from Indigenous water defenders into action. We also want to acknowledge the systemic racism that has occurred in the past and continues to occur today, resulting in injustice, violence, and the forced displacement of many communities on the coast, including Indigenous, Black, Japanese, and Chinese communities. We want to acknowledge that anti-Black racism and environmental racism are prevalent throughout our society and prevalent in ocean conservation, prevalent in the policy, prevalent in our solutions that we're putting forward. And so I really hope that we can reflect on each of our own history to the land, and that we can think about the privilege and the power that we hold, and that we can think about how does that inform the work that we're doing in ocean conservation and ocean stewardship, each of in our own context. And how can we then, once we reflected on that, take concrete action to ensure that we don't continue to perpetuate contemporary colonial erasure and violence. And I know this is something that we need to do not only right now, but every single day moving forward. How are we making sure that this is on the front of our minds? So I'd like to do a brief introduction about UNAC Vancouver. So UNAC Vancouver is a civil society organization that works to promote global awareness and further the work of the UN through educational events like this one, various recognition programs, as well as lots of partnerships. And we aim to inform, inspire, and engage people in Vancouver to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And so, of course, with World Oceans Day, we're looking at Sustainable Development Goal number 14, which is life underwater. But if the Sustainable Development Goals are very intertwined, you can't just look at one without all of the others. And so we're also going to really be focusing on today Sustainable Development Goal number 10, which is reducing inequalities. And I highly recommend that you go and look up the Sustainable Development Goals if you don't know of them already, and see the different goals that our world has set.
So Shoreline Cleanup is super excited to be able to work with UNAC Vancouver and to be able to think about the SDGs in relation to World Oceans Day. Just a little bit about Shoreline Cleanup. We've been around since 1994. We started at the Vancouver Aquarium in Vancouver, BC with one cleanup. And now we have thousands of cleanups every year. And we're so lucky to be able to engage tens of thousands, nearly 1 million volunteers in cleanups where we collect litter data each year. At this time, however, we are not leading any cleanups. To keep in mind the safety of our volunteers and the complex jurisdictions exist across Canada, we don't have the ability to safely say that we want our volunteers out on the shorelines. We will keep everyone posted, and hopefully as soon as possible, once it's safe, we will be able to be out on our shorelines again soon. You can always ask us any questions about when any of that is going to resume. We're available all the time.
Excellent. Thanks, Julia. So a bit of a context and background for World Oceans Day. So Canada is a country surrounded by 3 oceans, and we have the longest coastline in the world. So it was only fitting that back in 1992, the Ocean Institute of Canada and the International Center for Ocean Development proposed the concept of World Oceans Day at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. And now officially endorsed by the United Nations, World Oceans Day is a day that's celebrated every year on June 8th, so today, and they call it a day for us to connect and honor the ocean, which connects us all. So it's an event endorsed by the United Nations, but we do have lots of folks here across Canada that are working on World Oceans Day. We wanted to give a shout out to Oceans Week Halifax and Oceans Week Canada. You can go on their websites and you can see that there's numerous events that are being hosted this year, all of them online due to COVID. So you can keep participating in World Ocean Day's events, not just today, but throughout this entire week. So every year, there's a different theme for World Oceans Day. So 2 years ago, we looked at plastic pollution. Last year, we were looking at the intersection of gender in the ocean. And then this year, the theme is innovation for a sustainable ocean. So when you look up the word innovation, the definition I found on the Oxford Dictionary was a new method, a new idea, or a new product. But when I started looking a bit more deeply into what I really think innovation can mean, I found this adaptation from Wikipedia, which is innovation can be better solutions that meet new requirements or unarticulated needs and existing needs. So I think it's really important when we think of innovation, innovation doesn't necessarily mean a new idea. It could be a solution that has stood the test of time, but perhaps that solution or that idea has been suppressed and silenced, as we see with lots of Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous solutions. And so I think innovation and innovative solutions and the type of innovative solutions we need for our oceans are solutions and ideas that are inclusive, that are way more holistic, and that address the most pressing issues. And that can be lots of different things, everything from climate change to racial inequality. So I hope that when we think of innovation today on our panel, we're able to take more of that focus of a broader holistic view of innovation. I think when we look at innovation, we can also look at different scopes for innovation. So there's personal innovation, which can be changes that we make in our personal lives in order to address ocean challenges. But that can then ramp up all the way up to systemic innovation, which is how do we look at changes in the structure of complex systems. So how are we looking at changes in the structure of our society and how we respond to ocean challenges? And then, of course, we need to make sure that innovation is cross-sectorial. When I think of innovation, one of the first things that comes to mind is science and technology. That's where innovation comes from. But to address ocean challenges, we need to make sure that we're looking at all sectors and innovation from all sectors, which is why I'm really excited for this panel that we have here today, because the folks on this panel are going to be able to speak from innovation from a variety of different sectors and backgrounds, from changes in policy to arts and art making, technology and science, as well as in education and citizen engagement and youth engagement. So let's really broaden that term of innovation and really think about all the various ways that different sectors need to be innovative for us to preserve our oceans. So with that in mind, I'm really honored to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Dr. INGRID WALDRON. Dr. INGRID WALDRON is a sociologist, an associate professor in the Faculty of Health at Dalhousie University, the director of the Environmental Noxiousness, Racial Inequities, and Community Health Project, which is called the Enrich project. And then she's also the Flagship project co-lead of improving the health of people of African descent at Dalhousie's Healthy Populations Institute. So we're really excited to have her here to be able to deliver our keynote. I highly recommend that you read her book and that you also watch the Netflix documentary called There's Something in the Water. It's really impactful, and I think she's going to be speaking to some of that today. So thank you so much, INGRID.
Thank you, Jessica. Hello, everyone. So I have 20 minutes, right?
Yes.
Okay, so
give or take.
Okay, so what I want to do is I want to begin with just discussing some of the main arguments that I articulated in my book. Then I'm going to discuss environmental racism or provide a definition and provide some case studies in Canada so you get an understanding of what environmental racism is. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about what my project has been doing. Jessica talked about innovative approaches to addressing some of these issues. So I look at art and education and the partnerships that I've engaged in order to address environmental racism. So I wrote the book the book was published in 2018, and it was my response to what I was seeing in Nova Scotia in terms of how people were discussing environmental racism. It was a new topic for me. I was approached by an environmental activist in 2012 to take on this project. So before starting this project, I had never heard of environmental racism, and I knew absolutely nothing about the environment. I had done my doctoral work and my postdoctoral work on mental health. So this simply never came up. So I was quite a newbie, and I had a lot to learn. But what I did notice when I started doing the project is that the term that people were using, whether it be scholars or environmental activists or environmental NGOs, was environmental justice. And I said to myself, well, there's got to be more here. You know, I was reading the literature from the United States, and people were talking about environmental racism. And I thought, well, this is a bit problematic, because environmental justice is certainly the end goal, is what we want to get to. It's what we want to achieve, but we have to kind of diagnose the condition before we prescribe the medication. And for me, the condition is environmental racism. We have to understand how environmental racism manifests, how it's created, before we can determine the appropriate tools or approaches to achieve environmental justice. So I knew that as a sociologist and as a, what I guess you would call a race scholar, somebody who is focused on the sociology of race and ethnicity, I wanted to center race. I wanted race to be that central issue, not class or not gender necessarily, but race be that salient issue, but also articulate how race intersects with other social identities like gender, like culture, like social class, like living in a rural environment. How do those things shape experiences of environmental racism? How do we understand hierarchies of difference and the different ways in which racialized bodies, Indigenous peoples, Black peoples, experience the environment in sometimes very different ways? So the purpose of my book was to kind of make certain arguments, to turn certain things on its head because of what I was seeing in Nova Scotia in terms of the environmental justice discourse. Another thing that I wanted to do was to look at health. As a health researcher primarily, I wasn't finding a lot of literature in Canada. There are a group of people who are doing work on environmental health inequities, but for the most part, I felt that people were stuck in silos. You were either focused on environmental science or environmental justice, but not much talk about how did that impact people's bodies. The literature that we have certainly does talk about cancer, higher cancer rates if you live near to a toxic site. So there was some information, but I wanted it to be holistic. I wanted to talk about the emotional, the spiritual, the mental, the psychological, and the physical health impacts of environmental racism. And I felt that a holistic perspective was important, not just because it's a perspective that I adhere to personally, but if I were to work with Indigenous peoples, I have to understand, of course, that traditional Indigenous knowledge is about understanding holism, that you cannot separate the mind from the body from the land. So when Indigenous people say, you desecrate our land, you desecrate our body, that to me really connotes what I'm saying here, which is about the fact that it's all interrelated. The plants, the plants and the body and the mind and the land, everything is interconnected. So if one aspect of that is off balance, then everything is off balance. So looking at the spiritual, the mental, the psychological, and physical health impacts of environmental racism and how it's experienced in very unique ways by African Nova Scotian peoples and Mi'kmaq peoples, that's Indigenous people in Nova Scotia, was really important. Finally, I didn't want to come in and just suggest that I was the first one doing this. There's a history behind this, right? There are people who have been active around the issue of environmental racism in Canada and in Nova Scotia for decades. And I was just coming in 2012, starting this project. So I wanted to honor the fact that there are Indigenous communities across Canada, African Nova Scotian communities who have been doing this work long before I ever got here. So one of the reasons I wrote the book was also to document the long history of struggle on the part of these communities in terms of how they have been addressing environmental racism, but some of the challenges that they experience in addressing it and being seen by government. Okay. So this is a pretty succinct definition of environmental racism. Here is James Desmond. James Desmond is a longtime activist in the African Nova Scotian community of Lincolnville. And I met with him in 2013 when I got my first grant to build a team, to build a multi-sectoral, interdisciplinary team to start looking at the issue of environmental racism. This was in September of 2013. I drove down to Lincolnville, and we were filming the workshop participants. And this is what James says. And I love to show this definition because I think it's so simple, but it packs a punch. So James says the practice. This is how he defines environmental racism. The practice has been locating industrial waste sites next to African Nova Scotian Native and poor white communities that don't have a base to fight back. You ask if that's environmental racism. It's environmental racism to its core. So let's get to the more academic, in the next slide, the more academic definition of environmental racism. So when you look at the first box, it's about disproportionality, similar to what James Desmond just said. It's about the fact that certain communities are disproportionately selected for toxic industries and polluting industries more than other communities, and those communities tend to be Black and Indigenous. So it's about disproportionate siting of a landfill, for example. In the next box, what we have is a lack of political power. Well, when we look at the intersection of race and class and living in a rural environment, you look at those intersections, in many ways, it takes away the power from people. Now, people always have personal power, without a doubt. But what I'm referring to here is that these are people who lack economic resources. They lack political power. They're less likely to be heard by government. So this is another really key aspect of environmental racism, is that these communities, because of race, because of class, because of where they live, they tend to live in remote rural areas and on reserves. They are less likely to be heard because they don't have the kind of political clout and economic clout and access to important resources that other communities have. Third, it's also about the implementation of policies. It's about how do you implement those environmental policies? Who's making those environmental decisions, right? And how are they being implemented in ways that lead to disproportionality on the ground? So when people have asked me in the past, how can the environment be racist? How can water be racist? Right? It's not about water being racist or the soil being racist. It's about environmental policies being embedded with ideologies about who matters and who doesn't matter, right? And in our society, certain people get to matter more than other people, right? So you do have to question why these sites end up primarily, for example, in Indigenous communities across Canada. So it's about policies, about who's writing that policy. The fourth box is about the negative impacts of environmental policies that then result in differential rates of cleanup. The fact that it takes certain communities so long to be heard and for the government to clean up the site. I think of Sarnia, Ontario, Chemical Valley, and how long they've been struggling with the issue. I think of Boat Harbor and Pictou Landing First Nation in Nova Scotia and how long it took. They've been calling on the government since the 1980s. Why does it take so long for them to achieve cleanup by the government? The next box is about the history of excluding the communities that are most impacted from those decision-making boards. So, you know, what we're talking about here is that environmental policies are developed and people make decisions about where, for example, a landfill is placed or where a toxic industry is placed or a pulp mill. And the people who tend to be most impacted, Indigenous people, Black people, aren't the people around the table. They're not the people on those decision-making boards, those commissions, those regulatory bodies. So that allows environmental racism to keep going because the people who are making the decisions don't have the benefit of hearing from the people who are most impacted and hearing about how a particular industry is impacting them on the day-to-day. Okay. So I wanted to kind of discuss a few examples across Canada of environmental racism over the last 70 years. So this, Wet'suwet'en has gotten a lot of media attention over the past 2 years. So this is in BC. In British Columbia, the hereditary chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en Nation have come out against the Coastal GasLink pipeline, which seeks to transport liquefied natural gas from northeast BC to a terminal on the coast near the town of Kitimat. Mass demonstrations, sit-ins, and blockades have gripped parts of Canada over the movement to support the leaders of the Indigenous nation who are opposing this multi-billion-dollar pipeline project in BC. So that's a kind of very recent example of a pattern of environmental racism located in BC. Then we have, I just mentioned Chemical Valley, but the proper name is Amjinwang First Nation. Amjinwang First Nation near Sarnia, Ontario, referred to often as Chemical Valley, has had concerns about air pollution from industrial facilities in the area, such as oil refineries, power generating stations, and landfills. And Chemical Valley is often considered to be the largest petrochemical complex grouping because it's grouping over 60 petrochemical facilities within a 25 square kilometer area. They have, like other communities, extremely high rates of cancer, but also really serious reproductive health issues, which is also connected to living near to environmental hazards. You can move the slide. There's also Athabasca Chippewayan First Nation, Mikisew Cree First Nation, and the Métis Nation. The federal and provincial governments fail to take responsibility for poor water quality in Fort Chipewyan, a remote urban community comprised mostly of Athabasca Chippewayan, Mikisew Cree, and Métis peoples. This community is located downstream from Alberta's oil sands near Saskatchewan's uranium city, which is considered to be the largest industrial project on the planet, or was, at a certain point. Residents of Fort Chipewyan shared their concerns for quite some time that they were no longer able to swim, fish, or drink from the nearby water supply, and that they were being poisoned by contaminated water. The next slide. Here we get to Nova Scotia, Sabanagadi First Nation. I would say over the past 7 years, the community has been opposing the development of a brine discharge pipeline by Alton Gas near the Shubenacadie River, which would allow natural gas to be stored in underground salt caverns near the river. Next slide. Here we have Boat Harbor in Pictou Landing First Nation. I would say one of the top, 3 perhaps worst cases of environmental racism, along with Sarnia, Ontario. A mill has been pumping wastewater into Boat Harbor since 1967. You may have heard that our premier closed the mill at the end of January this year. So now they're just kind of involved in cleanup, but this is an example of a community that has been asking government to address this issue since the mid-1980s, and they were broken promises along the way. And finally, a decision was made by our premier this late last year, during the week of Christmas, that the mill would close at the end of January this year because he was not satisfied with the environmental assessment. He gave them 5 years to produce a robust environmental assessment, and he didn't think it was up to snuff. So that has closed. So that's a major, major victory in Nova Scotia. Next slide. Here's a historical case of both, I would say, gentrification and environmental racism. This is Africville. This is an African Nova Scotian community in, I would say, central Nova Scotia. And in the mid-1960s, the city of Halifax embarked on an urban renewal, or we can say gentrification, campaign, resulting in the forcible displacement of residents from their community. So they were forcibly pushed out and bulldozed out from their community, and to make way for industrial development. But in the wake of that, what was left were a number of environmental and social hazards, such as a fertilizer plant, a slaughterhouse, a tar factory, a stone and coal crushing plant, a cotton factory, a prison, 3 systems of railway tracks, and an open dump. Next slide. Here is Lincolnville. So I just showed you a photo of James Desmond earlier. This is his community, and he's been active around the landfill since 1974. There's a first and second generation landfill, right? So the first generation landfill, as I said, was put in place there in 1974. But in 2006, a second generation landfill was put on top of the first generation landfill. So of course the community is concerned that water from the first generation landfill is seeping into the second generation landfill. So they've been trying to address this issue since 1974 with respect to both landfills. And it's been tough going, right? So through my project, I've been trying to help them in other ways, because right now, I think what they would really like is for this landfill to be removed and put someplace else. But I don't truly think that's going to happen. So I've been trying to help them or support them in other ways. The next slide. And here's a community called Shelburne. You've got the north of Shelburne, and you've got the south of Shelburne. In the south of Shelburne, you've got a primarily African Nova Scotian community. In the north of Shelburne, you've got a primarily white community. The south of Shelburne, which is the Black community, was selected for a landfill in late 1940s, I think around 1947. And that a lot of stuff has been put in that landfill. It was near a naval base. So you had a lot of stuff put in there. It was near a hospital. Some community members even said dead animals were put in there. So they've been dealing with that landfill since 1974, but finally got that landfill closed at the end of 2016. Like all the other communities, they have a very high rates of cancer. So I'm going to talk about what I've been doing in terms of supporting that community as well next. So my Enrich project started in 2012. And I'm the director of the Environmental Noxiousness, Racial Inequities project, and I have been since that time. And the whole purpose of this project is to kind of use a multi-method approach, an intersectoral approach, an intersectional approach, and a partnership approach to address environmental racism in very different ways. So you can move the slide. One of the ways I try to do this is first by creating awareness about the issue. When I started the project, I had a lot of questions from the public. What is environmental racism? What does it mean? And I felt it was really important that I hold a lot of workshops and community events and public engagement events at the library, just to kind of get the word out about this topic, because people didn't know what it was about, and to raise awareness. And it's also a really great way for me to get volunteers. This is one of the events I held in the library in 2015, and I always try to, just like anybody who puts on a panel, you want to get people with different perspectives. And because my project looks at both the African Nova Scotian and the Indigenous community, all of my events engage both communities. So my panelists are from both communities, and I want them to share with the audience how the issues are impacting them. But I also like to get government people on board, right? So the person who's standing there is Lenore Zan, who we'll talk about later. She's a politician. And then we've got activists. The woman in green is Lynn Jones, and she's a major activist as well. So I try to get people who can talk about this issue from different perspectives while kind of, entertaining people sometimes. I like to have drummers, so I'll have Indigenous drumming, African drumming, but at the same time, I want it to be educational, right? Because I really want to engage people. Next slide. It was really important that I start to publish, of course. When I started the project in 2012, I visited Nova Scotia Environment, and they were very kind of doubtful that there was any link between environmental issues and health. And they were questioning a lot of things that I was saying. So I thought, it's really important to put pen to paper. It's really important for me to start publishing. This wasn't my doctoral work. It wasn't my postdoctoral work. So I was starting from scratch, but I knew that I needed to start to publish. This is my book. I published journal articles, but this book was published by Fernwood in 2018. And in many ways, it's a response. It's everything that I wanted to pack into this book, which was focus on health, a little bit more in a holistic way because I wasn't seeing enough published articles in Canada on health with respect to environmental racism. Center race is another thing I wanted to do. But I also want to look at racial capitalism, colonialism, neoliberalism. I wanted to connect all of these things and provide a really critical analysis of environmental racism. There's also a gendered analysis. How is environmental racism experienced very differently based on gender, based on social class, and based on race and culture? How is it experienced very differently by different bodies? So this is my first and only book that I've ever written, and it's about 200 pages long, and I tried to cram everything in that book in terms of all the things that were concerning me at the time. Next slide. You may have noticed Lenore Zan in the other slide. She was standing up. So she's an MLA, or was an MLA in Nova Scotia. And at the end of 2014, I said, I really need some help from politicians. I need somebody to support what I'm doing, because I was visiting Nova Scotia Environment. I think I visited them 3 times, and I felt that I was getting the runaround, you know? I felt like I was chasing my tail. I felt that they didn't really want to do anything. So I thought, okay, let me approach the MLAs, because they typically have closer, more authentic relationships with communities. So I kind of started a little project for myself. This was the week of Christmas in 2014, and I called a whole bunch of MLAs. I left voicemail messages for them. I followed up with emails. And the first person who got back to me was Lenore. Lenore was born in Australia. She is an actress by training, but moved into politics probably about 15 years ago. And we met at Starbucks, and I immediately liked her. She was enthusiastic, she was real, and she said, we can create a bill. We can create a private member's bill. I don't want you to get your hopes up, because this bill is probably not going to pass, because private members' bills don't pass. But what it can do is bring attention to the issue of environmental racism, and then we can hold a press conference. And that's the last thing I was expecting. I just thought, let me find out how she can help me, but I certainly wasn't thinking we were going to put forward a bill. So of course I was extremely excited, because I recognized that environmental legislation is a piece of the puzzle. It's not everything, but it's important. So we did. We developed a bill together. I had the literature that I could provide to her, because I'd been conducting my study. So I handed over the literature and the work that I'd been doing and the research and the findings. And then she put together a bill, and it was introduced end of April 29th of 2015, and then put forward to second reading in November of 2015. Keep in mind, this was an NDP bill. We've had a Liberal Party in power for years. So it was an opposition bill. So I didn't expect it to pass, and it didn't. You know, it was sitting on the table for quite a long time. I do thank Lenore, though, and the NDP party, because they reintroduced that bill every single year since 2015 up until 2018, when Lenore then moved to the Liberal Party, which I would say upset me, but now I realize that she has a lot more power. And that power is actually incredibly important, because this year she contacted me and she said, what do you think, Ingrid? What do you think if I put forward a federal bill? Because the bill I was talking about earlier, that's a provincial bill, right? She said, I want to put forward a federal bill. I'm part of the Liberal Party now, and I'd like to do something for Canada. So why don't we rework the bill that we developed in 2015, add a little bit more stuff in this bill and put it forward? And she did. February 26th of this year, there's a federal environmental racism bill. The provincial one was the first of its kind. This one is the first of its kind. She took some snippets of what we did before. She added a few things about reparations and health, I believe, and compensating the communities financially. And it was introduced February 26th of this year. And she got support from Elizabeth May and quite a few people in her party. And we were very excited, because she was going to put it forward to second reading. And then COVID-19 hit and stopped us in our tracks. Unfortunately, I mean, COVID is certainly much more important, but we really felt that we were going to go somewhere with this bill, right? So I did email her a few weeks ago, and I said, what's happening with the bill? She said, well, obviously, Ingrid, right now we're focused on COVID, but we're going to look at it a little later on. So I know she gave an interview to the Globe and Mail last week, which should be coming out soon. So I'm very curious to hear about what she's planning for the bill, if that's what she discussed. I believe she did. So that bill is called C-230, and the proper title is A National Strategy to Redress Environmental Racism, Bill C-230. Next slide. I showed you a photo of one of my events, and sitting in the audience was a geologist at that event. And he met with me a week later, and he said, I loved your event, but why don't we think about giving these communities a win, something practical, something tangible? He said, a bill is great, legislation is great, all this stuff is great, your book, the research is great, but we need to give these communities something tangible that they can hold on to. And I said, well, what are you suggesting? And he said, well, why don't we test their water? You know, they would like to know what's in their water. These are communities who have been dealing with contaminated water in some cases since the early 1970s. Wouldn't it be great if we did a water testing project? So we did that for Lincolnville. Lincolnville with the landfill that I showed you earlier. And it went really well. You know, we tested the water. We did some workshops with the community. We explained to them what water testing was about. We showed them how to test their own water. We trained environmental students to test water. And then we went back and we, through a workshop, we discussed the links between health and contaminants. So we said, hey, this really worked well. And based on that project, we decided to form an NGO in 2017 called Rural Water Watch. No, that's the next slide, the slide before, yeah. So this is Rural Water Watch, this is our logo. And in 2017, we co-founded this because we realized that that project in Lincolnville was something that was missing. It was a community-based project, and the government would say, which makes sense, that homeowners are responsible for their own wells. So we said, well, some of these homeowners are in remote regions and can't afford water testing, so that's where we come in. Why don't we, at no cost, test people's wells? So that Lincolnville project provided the blueprint for this NGO. We've been going since 2017. We've done water testing in Lincolnville and Shelburne. We're looking for Indigenous communities to test water. We've been training students, and we are also doing healthy wells workshops, teaching people how to keep their wells healthy. So this is a very exciting NGO for us, and we've even gotten funded, surprisingly, from Nova Scotia Environment, who obviously recognize that there's a need, right? So we're filling a need. So they have funded us for this NGO. Next slide. Eco-justice is important. What about the legalities of all of this, right? Eco-justice is a Canadian law charity. It's got offices in Vancouver and Toronto and Calgary. And I had forged a relationship with the Calgary office in 2016 when we were doing that Lincolnville water testing project. And then they opened up an office in Halifax in spring of 2018. So I met with them and I said, I'd like to tell you about the communities here in Nova Scotia that are dealing with environmental issues. And they said, well, what we can do is we can meet with them and we can look at legal remedies. That could be a private prosecution, that could be a class action lawsuit, which typically doesn't really happen, in Canada. But we can look at legal remedies of various kinds to address their issues. So they are working with the communities that I've been working with to look at some of those legal remedies. Next slide. This is also very exciting. I'm working with an NGO, Let's Sprout. It's a project that was founded by two Dalhousie students. And it's a project that actually tries to develop leadership skills in young women. And they were also at one of my events, and they said, we'd like to work with you at some point, and it actually happened. And what we're doing right now is we are looking at developing creative online tools that middle and high school teachers can use in the classroom to teach about environmental racism and environmental justice. The first part of this project was an environmental scan, where we tried to identify whether or not there were any courses in the middle and high school curricula in Nova Scotia teaching critically about environmental racism and environmental justice. It's one thing to talk about sustainability, but I think a discussion on environmental racism is much more critical and perhaps not as comfortable. And so this project is about, are there gaps in the curriculum? If there are gaps, then we want to be able to support high school and middle school teachers in teaching this difficult topic of environmental racism, but also kind of address some of their fears about talking about it, because most teachers in Nova Scotia are white, and talking about race is very difficult. We understand that. So it's not just about throwing them into the classroom and having them talk about these things, but how do we support them in being comfortable about talking about uncomfortable subjects. So it's about creating innovative tools. Those tools could be poetry, spoken word, music, graphic art, and posting them on some type of website so the teachers can select from, a lot of tools in terms of teaching this information in the classroom. But more broadly, what we want to do is transform the high school and middle school curriculum in some way. The tools are one thing, but how do we get into the curriculum? How do we start to look holistically at what teachers are teaching and try to incorporate Mi'kmaq and Indigenous histories and African Nova Scotian history and, once again, environmental racism and all these interconnecting issues into the curricula, because it's not being taught right now. Next slide. I'm also working right now, hoping to work with Nova Scotia Health Authority. They're particularly interested in climate change, and they're interested in climate change and the social determinants of health. So they contacted me in October of last year about doing workshops in the African Nova Scotian community, particularly with a seniors group. A seniors group in one of the communities is very interested in climate change. So kind of building on that partnership. We talked about it certainly last year. However, unfortunately, of course, the pandemic hit, and we haven't been able to move forward on this because the plan was to kind of go ahead and do some workshops. But this is tentatively a plan in terms of how do we make climate change much more of a pressing issue in the African Nova Scotian community, a community that I think is not that much engaged in climate change issues. I think we all need to be, but for whatever reason, they haven't been. So I'm hoping that this project would change that. Next slide. A few weeks later, after Nova Scotia Health Authority contacted me, retired environmental scientists contacted me, and they said, we would like to do some workshops on climate change in the African Nova Scotian community. I said, well, about a week ago, somebody else contacted me, so why don't we all do it together? So now, we're working with Climate Action Services and Nova Scotia Health Authority about putting on those workshops in African Nova Scotian communities around climate change and social determinants of health once the pandemic dies down. Next slide. Training students has been key for me. I train students in every discipline. It's really amazing how environmental racism is connected to so many different disciplines: planning, sociology, health, law, environmental science. It's, I've been able to meet and train students in so many different departments who have a kind of different interest in a different aspect of environmental racism. And some of them want to do a literature review. Some of them actually want to be involved in civil disobedience, but they don't have any way to do that because they don't know any members of the communities, the Black community and the Indigenous community. So since I have forged those relationships, it's kind of an entryway, where they can start to meet the communities and go up to the communities and engage in civil disobedience and protests and marches and whatnot. So this has been a really interesting part of the project, because sometimes it gets a bit boring, right? When you're sitting in a class, in an environmental science class, and you're hearing about these communities that are impacted by environmental racism and you've never met them. So I think this is one of the more important parts of my project. Next slide. Certainly, sharing information is important. And as academics, we know that we need to share it in different ways. We need to impact people in different ways. It's like a marketer. It's like somebody in marketing or advertising. Who do you want to impact? What changes do you want that person to make? For example, if it's a policymaker, what's the best way to get at that policymaker? So throughout the years, I have used everything at my disposal: social media, newspaper interviews, radio, podcast, television, and documentary film everything that I can to get the message out and to impact people in different ways. Next slide. One of those people is actress Ellen Page, who just all of a sudden one day reached out to me. She was following me on Twitter. I didn't realize it was her. I didn't follow back because I'm always very careful about who I follow back, right? But I noticed somebody by the name of Ellen Page on my Twitter feed, and it didn't connect for me. I didn't know it was the actress. And then I went back 2 weeks later and I was like, is this Ellen Page, the actress? Why would she be following me? I've never been followed by a movie star or a celebrity, so it was a bit weird. And I noticed that she was promoting my book, and she was talking about my project, and she was saying, go read Ingrid's book, go read Ingrid's book. So I said, well, this has got to be Ellen Page, the actress in Inception and X-Men and Juno, and I was blown away. So I DM'd her and I said, I would like to thank you. You've been promoting my book and putting a spotlight on this issue. I really want to thank you for that. And we had some conversations on the phone at the end of 2018, at the beginning of 2019, about what could she do, how can she help, and we eventually came to the idea of doing a film. Next slide. And that film is called There's Something in the Water. She wanted it to be based on my book. And we got accepted to the Toronto International Film Festival and the Atlantic Film Festival and a lot of other film festivals like Vancouver that we couldn't go to, and European film festivals, and we just couldn't go. But this started the ball rolling and picked up by a lot of media, international media, of course, and getting the word out there. What better way to create awareness about environmental racism than film? Film is so powerful. And then you've got the Toronto International Film Festival, the most prestigious film festival in the world. You get everybody coming there from all over the world, seeing this film and hearing about this and making connections to what's happening in their countries. You know, this is exactly what we wanted. So we screened that at the Toronto International Film Festival September 9th. And then when I came home, I then had to screen it at the Atlantic Film Festival. I think that was September 11th. And then we screened it at other film festivals in Ontario and the Halifax Black Film Festival here in February. Slide. This is us at the Toronto International Film Festival. We did the red carpet. It was a blast. It was one of the best times in my life. It was a blast. It's hard to remember everything, but wow. At one point, Ellen was sitting at the back on the back seat of the car, and I just turned to her and I said, "Thank you very much." And she said, "Well, you're welcome." I said, "I'm just having a blast, and this is so much fun. I'd just like to thank you." Next slide. We found out that Netflix had purchased it in October of last year, but I couldn't say anything until March of this year when it started streaming. But so we're now on Netflix, and of course, this gets the message out, right? I only got Netflix last year, so I don't think I quite understood what a big deal Netflix was. I should have, but I've never gotten it before last year, but I realized that it's all over the world, and wow. So, you know, what I'm hoping for this film and what I've received already is people emailing me, telling me that it's inspirational, that the Indigenous and Black women featured in this film are inspirational. That's exactly what I wanted to achieve with this film. Will it solve the problem of environmental racism? I don't know. Maybe it has a part to play, but that wasn't my goal. My goal was to inspire young women, particularly young Indigenous women, young Black women, women of every race and creed, to feel inspired by this, what seems to be simple acts by simple women, but result in really huge acts and make huge differences in our community. So you look at those women and you feel inspired, and perhaps you say to yourself, maybe I can do that too. That's what I want, you know, people to look at that film and say, wow, maybe I can do that. Next slide. And I'd like to thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ingrid, for sharing. I think environmental racism is a topic and even a term that is relatively new to me, and I just really appreciate the way that you laid it out and gave examples all across Canada of where this is occurring, and then how we can get involved through various organizations. And I hope that post-COVID, we can really find a way to get engaged in Bill C-230, because that sounds really exciting. Amazing, thank you. Ingrid's going to stay around, I think, for questions at the end.
Yes.
Amazing. So if you do have any questions for Ingrid, please just put them in the chat, and we'll return to those after we've heard from our 5 panelists. So we're so lucky to have 5 different panelists from all across the country that are here today to speak a bit to their expertise and for us to ask them a few questions. So we're going to start out east, and each panelist is going to give a short just introduction to who they are. So we'll start in Halifax with Sonia Lee. Sonia Lee is a science producer for Ocean School, which is a free online ocean education initiative of the National Film Board and Dalhousie University. I'm really excited to have her here as one of our panelists.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you, Ingrid. It's a little bit terrifying to follow Ingrid's presentation as the first panelist, but hello, my name is Sonia Lee, and currently I am in the ancestral and unceded homelands of the Mi'kmaq or Elnu people, and like Jessica said, I am in Halifax. I am the science producer for Ocean School, which is a free online education platform that combines storytelling, science, and education to advance ocean literacy and to teach everyday school curriculum through an ocean lens. It is an initiative of the National Film Board of Canada and Dalhousie University, and all of our content is bilingual, and it uses an inquiry-based learning approach. We work really closely with departments of education, and right now we currently have 3 modules online, 4 online, 3 from the Atlantic, 1 from Costa Rica, and we have 2 more in the pipeline, 1 that we filmed in Indonesia and Australia, and 1 we co-developed with the Celtic First Nation in Central Coast, BC. So I have a science background in marine biology, and I work together with filmmakers and educators, and we create a variety of different media sources for Ocean School. So that can be your videos that you consume regularly, or 360 immersive experiences, augmented reality, virtual reality, and other educational interactive games. And all of these media sources on our platform also have an associated activity. So that's kind of what the Ocean School platform offers. In terms of innovation, we include a lot of cutting-edge classroom technology, so stuff like AR, VR, immersive experiences, but also our platform is integrated into Google Classrooms, which is what a lot of educators in Canada and around the world use in their classrooms. And we also have, teacher supports, a community of practice of educators and teachers who use Ocean School all over the world. Not only do we include the technology side of innovation, the way that we approach our content and the way that we produce our media, our secret sauce is the science, the story, and the education. And this kind of collaboration inherently allows our content to be interdisciplinary. And I think because we're including story in STEM, we get to stuff like social science, geography, history included in our content. So we are able to get engaged in ocean science from other directions other than just pure science. Also, the way that Ocean School works is we're very iterative. So every time we online presentation. Every time we start a new module, we try to look for what are the most important stories to tell? How do we partner with local communities? What do we include? And so those are the way that we're able to reflect also enables us to be creative and innovative and forward-thinking when we're creating new content for science education, for STEM education, and also in our science communication. So that's Ocean School.
Awesome. Thanks, Sonia. I'm so excited for the module on the Celtic First Nations to come out. I was looking at that on your site, so very excited.
Yeah, we had a good time.
Amazing. Let's continue west, and we're going to meet Betty Karpik. Betty Karpik is an interdisciplinary artist, arts educator, and environmentalist. She's worked on numerous projects, including a project with Ocean Wise's Ocean Bridge program last year. So we're really excited to have her.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I am Cree on my mother's side and Eastern European on my dad and my people. And I, myself, lived in the Churchill River Basin for a long time. So I grew up in a remote northern community. And much of what I do and how I do it is tied to the connections I had growing up in the north and the really close connections to people who lived off the land to survive and thrive in a reciprocal relationship. So I learned the value of supporting an interconnected ecosystem, and that also translated to the way I think about community and how I think about the way I relate and do projects, which is sometimes pretty organic way of approaching. So in the 1970s, the community of South Indian Lake, which is my mother's home community, it was a nomadic community depending on fishing and trapping and hunting. They had the second largest whitefish fishery in North America. And then Manitoba Hydro wanted to divert the Churchill River, and they did that while I was in high school. A lot of the people couldn't speak English, and so there were a few white people, like my grandfather, who was able to help because essentially they would have just flooded the community. There was a forced relocation without any compensation at all, absolutely nothing. They were seen as disposable people, and their way of life and their concepts of work and economy and caring for future generations was totally dismissed. There was no acknowledgement of that, and so seeing that as a youth really impacted me forever. And to see people who are proud and happy become, lose their homes, lose their way of life. My uncles were trappers and fishermen. And by the 2018, 95% of the residents of the community were on social assistance because they could no longer work in that land. So that experience of growing up and was how I decided to speak about it through art. So that fueled my search for answers and my approach. So even though I try to do it in a way that recognizes who people are, regardless of whatever project it is, but also so that we're kind of focusing more on working to receive, embrace, and transform. And yeah, I work with all ages, all abilities, and it's very, my art is very process-based, and it's about collaboration. There's no kind of end goal about, you know, what it's going to change gears, and people participating kind of encourage the change. So that organic feel. And really, in the end, you know, people say to me, well, you know, where is it going to go? Is it going to last? Is it going to do all these things? And I'm like, why are we not asking those things about our planet? Like, that's more important to me. So it's about the conversations and the things that happen when people are actually working together. And so it's going to change a bit now in our new landscape, but I'm looking forward to those challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. Yeah, I think COVID is challenging us all in many different ways. We're going to meet Mia Atokiak. Mia is an Inuit early career scientist who works with the Nunavut Impact Review Board. She's also an Ocean Bridge alumnus, which is where I originally met her, and I'm so excited to have her part of this panel.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Like Jessica said, my name is Mia Atokiak. I was born and raised here in Cambridge Bay, Nunavut. And I just want to warn everyone, I don't have the greatest internet up here, so if I crack out or if I mess up, just let me know and I will repeat. Yeah, so I just want to say thank you first to Jessica and to the Shoreline Cleanup. Thank you so much for reaching out. I am very happy and proud to be a part of this. So just a little introduction about myself. Like Jessica said, I'm a junior technical advisor for the Nunavut Impact Review Board. NIRB's mandate is to protect and promote the well-being of the environment and people of Nunavut through our impact assessment process. So I get to do environmental assessments on a daily basis. But more back, I remember being, in grade 5 and learning for the first time that only 5% of the ocean has been explored, and that blew my mind. STEM is the reason why I love the ocean so much and love, protecting it and protecting the environment. And I also, just a bit about myself, I love public speaking. I love sharing my knowledge. I love gaining knowledge. And I love just being able to connect with people, especially in platforms like this. So also, like Jessica said, I am an Ocean Bridge alumni. I just completed the 2019 Ocean Bridge program, where I got to work with 49 other youth all across Canada on ocean issues, about spreading the message about how important the ocean is. And it was an absolutely amazing year. I was also Ocean Networks Canada's first youth science ambassador hired. I got to go down to Victoria, BC and do some training down there, but then come back up here to Cambridge Bay with all of that knowledge and technology and work with my community and do community-based research and learn from my community, do interviews with local elders about climate change and, the changes they're seeing in the ocean, and getting the importance of that traditional knowledge all around the ocean and climate and how that all interlinks. Another thing is I am a youth mentor in a program called Iqaluit. Iqaluit is a program that started in Nunavut for Nunavut, but now we've also expanded to other provinces and territories. But Iqaluit is a program that wants to show Indigenous youth that they can be involved in science and research in a meaningful way. I'll talk more about that in later, but I am very excited to be a part of this. I've always had a love for the ocean and protecting the ocean, using my voice for other people who can't really express their views. So I absolutely love these types of panels and conferences. So I'm very excited to not just share my perspective, but also learn from you as well. So thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Mia. And thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing, your knowledge and your experience. We're really lucky to have you. We're going to meet next Shreyas Patankar. Shreyas is one of the newest researchers at the OceanWise Plastic Lab, where he works on microplastic pollution. So that's one of the newest researchers. I'm really excited to hear a bit more about his approach and what he's been doing with the Plastics Lab.
Thank you, Jessica, and hello, everyone. I'm really honored to be speaking to you all and be a part of this amazing group here today. And I guess, like Jessica mentioned, I am a research scientist at the OceanWise Plastics Lab, where our main work is to do with coming up with science-based solutions to combat plastic pollution in our oceans. But maybe I can tell you a little bit about myself and my background. I grew up in India, and I guess since school I've studied physics and mathematics. That was kind of my background. And I then went on to do my doctoral studies in California, where I studied physics again. And I guess the kind of background or the mental frame that a lot of people in my profession come from is we come from a sense of wonder about the world and learning about the universe and our place in it. So, we spent a lot of time studying quantum mechanics and astrophysics and things like that. But I think towards the end of my doctoral program, I was kind of hoping to use some of the tools and ideas that I learned to things that I saw were really pressing challenges that could use these tools, like the climate crisis or plastic pollution or having healthy oceans and issues like that. So that's kind of finding that path along or following that path along. I ended up working with OceanWise, and I also work at a nonprofit organization in Vancouver called Co-Factor Conversations, where we build collaborations around specific problems that affect British Columbia and try to come up with ideas together. So yeah, and I guess the part I wanted to highlight about innovations was I think this is where it's important for those of us who see ideas in different disciplines or different areas of study to bring those to solving pressing problems and important challenges. And that is how I see the role of innovation in helping get us to healthy oceans. And I'm happy to speak about that further.
Amazing, thank you. And all the way on our west coast, we're going to meet Dr. Kate Moore. Professor Kate Moore is the CEO of Ocean Network Canada, an ocean monitoring initiative out of the University of Victoria.
Hey, thanks so much for inviting me. I first want to start by acknowledging, with respect to the Tla'amin peoples on whose traditional territory Ocean Networks Canada stands, and also the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanish peoples, whose historical relationships with both the land and the ocean continues to this day. So thanks for inviting me, and I'll try to give you a bit of an overview about my background first, and touch on Ocean Networks Canada as well. Just to keep time, I want to just make sure I time myself so I don't go over. So I grew up in the United States, and one of the first environmental issues that impacted me was when I was in high school. A hurricane came and hit my community in a huge area of the United States. And my whole house was flooded, and we became refugees for quite a long time, and it was really impactful. It taught me that change happens, and stuff doesn't matter that much. It's really about the world and the environment. I got degrees in engineering, bachelor's, master's, and PhD. And through my career, I've been able to use engineering in innovative ways to approach scientific problems. But I've had the opportunity also to use innovation in policy. So I started off in government in Canada, in Bedford Institute of Oceanography, exploring the Arctic Ocean, understanding the seafloor up in the land. I then had the opportunity to become president of the Ocean Drilling Program, which is the International Scientific Drilling Program. It's where I helped to add new innovation to the way we understood, for example, the Earth's past climate from recovering sediment cores. I jumped into academia and became a professor, where I was a professor in Rhode Island and led, as a professor and a researcher, the first Arctic climate expedition to the Central Arctic Ocean, where we learned a huge amount about the Earth's past, and where I woke up to the real impacts of climate change, because we were able to learn that the sea ice that's been around for 15 million years from that record is now going away in that decade. And then I had an opportunity to work in President Obama's White House Office in Science and Technology Policy, where I was able to actually innovate in policy. And it was wonderful because policy does rule the world. And as INGRID started off, working hand in hand, not only on the problem, but also on the policy and legal solutions are really important. And I learned it a lot there. And it's really important for all of us to begin, even if we're working in science alone, to work also in those realms to actually make those changes. And then I had the opportunity to come here where I was able to roll up my sleeves and actually lead a fantastic team, technological team of both physical ocean infrastructure and digital infrastructure. We are the world's leading ocean observatory system, and we're one of Canada's major science infrastructure. And we measure everything in the ocean, from microbes to whales, earthquakes to tsunamis, and we even now have installed a neutrino observatory to understand the universe. So we're a happy group who deliver for science and also data products for public safety, climate change, and climate solutions.
Amazing. Thank you, Kate, for giving that overview. I've always been, I love Ocean Networks Canada, so I'm really grateful to have you here with us today. I'm going to move on by asking each of our panelists a question. And I know we're running a little bit late, but hopefully you can all hold on, because I think these questions will allow our panelists really to speak about innovation and their background. And I'm sure if there's any other questions at the end, if we don't get to them, I know that all of our panelists are active on social media and various other ways for you to contact them. So I'll start with Betty. One of the first steps when we're thinking about ocean stewardship is reflecting on how people and communities relate to the ocean and understand the intrinsic value of our oceans. And so our question for you is, in your experience, how can art and art making influence how we appreciate the value of water to address ocean challenges?
You're still able to
sorry,
share.
Betty, I think you just got unmuted, so we didn't hear that first part.
That's fine. Art is a universal language, and it allows us as humans to speak collectively through actions. And it's a way of telling personal stories, bringing together teachings, legends, histories, memory, really the whole gamut of being a human. So that's what I love about using art. I do a lot of community engaged art where I do projects with different groups. So I try to get an understanding of a group and then think of a project that can be done in an accessible, friendly, and non-threatening way. That's important to me. So, and then when it comes together, there's a sort of fluidity. And I mentioned that earlier. So a project can change by the participants that are taking involved in it, and just that's what ideas do. So right now, when I think about the arts and the influence of the arts, I think a lot about a pretty historic book that I feel needs a lot more attention. Everybody see that book? It's the final report on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And in here, it says, thinking must change. The way we talk to and about each other must change. So I don't feel that we can have innovation unless we have recognition of our entire human ecosystem and our water ecosystem, plant ecosystems, the whole shebang, and then use reconciliation as a platform to strengthen some of the situations and hardships and difficulties that don't seem to stay with our collective need to change. I mean, I think about boiled water advisories. I think about what has gone on in grassy narrows for 50 years. I think about where I've come from, where, I mean, I'm happy to say there is now an alliance that is strengthening those voices. And people are seeing that it can't be done, change can't just be done by one sector or one discipline. It takes a lot of voices and a lot of approaches. It has to come from the grassroots, from academia, from communities, from real people being able to authentically speak. I feel the hierarchies that we have sometimes minimize even when they don't intend to minimize. So yeah, I mean, art gives people the ability to be curious, engaged, and connected. And I feel that those things are valuable to people because they can be shared multi-generationally. And art's always there. It's, doesn't always have it takes on different roles. And during COVID, people are, stitching and painting and writing poems and taking photos. And so we saw kind of like a spike, which was really nice. And I hope it's sustainable. But even if it's not sustainable, I hope it's nourished people to kind of rethink their lives and how they're going to take care of oceans and the planet and each other. Did I answer your question?
Yes. No, I think you touched on COVID, but I've been seeing that in my community is just how much the arts have helped us process COVID and this situation. And so I think that, yeah, looking at the arts to help us process all of ocean challenges and understand our relationship to water is, yeah, pretty incredible. And I also hope it continues beyond COVID.
I'd just like to add that I did a project last year with the Ocean Bridge cohort that came to Lake Superior. And yeah, it was a really enriching time to, meet people who never met each other for 2.5 hours. There's the art piece. So each of the participants stitched or inked a 6 by 6 inch square. And then at the Urban Expedition Gathering in Ottawa in January 2020, we started putting the squares on, or the participants put them on the squares. So the whole map is stitched. And then underneath some of the squares, people wrote their hopes for the future. So it's a great kind of legacy piece. And I think it was a really great way to get people to have conversations and have camaraderie without, in a more relaxed way and a more maybe fun way that brings some joy and hope.
Thanks. Yeah, I've heard really good things about that project. So yeah, I know Ocean Bridge and Oceanwise is really grateful for your involvement with that.
Yeah, it was a beautiful time. Thanks.
Amazing. Yeah, speaking of Oceanwise, let's go to Shreyas. So Shreyas is a plastic forensic scientist and researcher with Oceanwise. You're pioneering a lot of innovative practices to combat plastic pollution in Canada. And so our question for you is, what is the future of ocean plastic research, and how is this helping to achieve the goal of a plastic-free ocean?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I actually just wanted to highlight something Betty just mentioned, which is about how innovation really comes about when you have people who think about problems and from different perspectives working together, and that is even relevant in the kinds of science that we do as in any other discipline. So I'll just quickly give you a sense of scale of the problem. That we estimate that there are millions of tons of plastic that are entering the oceans every year. And the big problem with this is that once they're in the ocean, there's essentially not much we can do about it. There are measures that people are working on and trying to deal with, but once they're there, there's not much we can do about it. So the real impact we can have in solving this problem is at the source and how we can stop pollutants from getting in the oceans. But where it gets murky and tricky is right now it's really hard to trace these plastics to know what even is the main cause of plastics, or where should our efforts be targeted. So that's some of that challenge is what we are working on, and trying to use techniques that involve collecting databases all over the world and pulling all of that together. And as it happens, maybe people in the audience are familiar that we are living in the age of big data, and there are amazing advances being made in data science and machine learning and things and areas of science like that. So we are using some of that technology for the good by helping that to build up these databases and giving people in charge of decision making a big picture of what this problem of plastics in the ocean looks like worldwide, and where can we target action that can have the biggest impact. So that's kind of what we are hoping for, that these tools that have been developed and used for many different purposes, but maybe we can do something good with it and have a real impact.
Thanks, Shreyas. Yeah, I mean, I think one of those things is what the Shoreline Cleanup does through all their work, is just encouraging citizens to go out and collect the garbage before it even hits water.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's much more complicated, obviously, to pick up, like you were saying, pick up garbage and plastic once it's already in the ocean. So thanks to Shoreline Cleanup and all the volunteers for everything that they do. Thank you. So of course, these are, really big issues and challenges of our oceans, and communicating this is one of the, I think, a challenge as well. Is how do we share this with people and still give them hope? And so I'd like to ask Sonia, we're seeing more and more online education programs, and this has increased with COVID, of course, as a lot of classrooms are moving online and will continue to move online. So what I found is a particular challenge of online learning is to ensure that students are actually active learners instead of just passively absorbing information and absorbing videos. So in your experience, what are the best ways to create engaging online and experiential learning opportunities about ocean stewardship?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's a little bit hard for a lot of people to kind of equate experiential learning to like sitting in front of the computer. Yeah. But what Ocean School does is use a pedagogical approach, so an educational approach called inquiry-based learning. And this is something that all of the curricula throughout the different provinces and territories in Canada are moving towards. And this kind of learning is not just about like, oh, in grade 3, you need to learn X, Y, Z. It's more about teaching students how to be critical thinkers, teaching them how to ask important questions, find answers to their questions, and also share their findings. And so this kind of take the reins of your own education plus the creative storytelling that we use in Ocean School. This kind of encourages the students, while consuming or learning on our platform, to go down paths that they are particularly interested in. And so, for example, and like multiple learners can get the same, like different things from the same video. So for example, one student might watch one of our videos and be like, whoa, why is kelp the fastest growing thing in the Pacific Ocean, for example? I don't know, I'm just rhyming things off the top of my head. And then another student, like watching the same video, can be like, oh, how many coastal First Nations use kelp as a means of harvesting? You know, it's that, and then students can go down the pathway of why is kelp so fast, grows so fast, and another one about Indigenous communities. And our platform allows that, and it's that kind of choosing your own adventure is very engaging. And also, all of our media content is associated with an activity that our educators and the rest of our team I guess, create to facilitate reflection of what they consumed, but also these activities try to relate the media or the concepts in the media to their own communities, to their own environments. And so these kinds of activities tie it back to their own lives. And also we encourage the learners on Ocean School to plan for some sort of action on the question they're trying to answer. So we actually have separate videos called Call to Actions, where we encourage students, give examples of actions you can take on some of the concepts or ideas we're talking about in a module, and then also help them plan and execute those, and also share with their peers or their community members as well. So and this is something that our education team and our outreach team were continually trying to revamp and figure out. I mean, like, this COVID thing has obviously been very devastating in so many ways, but you know, our project has been able to fill kind of a need of online learning to help educators and parents during this time. And our users have increased 300% since mid-March. So we are helping facilitate that ocean learning, you know, inspiring young minds, but we're also still trying to figure it out at the same time. You know, our education team and outreach team are super stellar. They've kind of rejigged our platform in different ways to facilitate learning at home. We've parsed out some of the bits so it's easier for parents to teach their own kids, because not every parent is a teacher, you know, so we try to make it as easy as possible. But I think in conclusion, like, giving the reins to the learners and getting them to take charge of their own learning is one way to do it, but also make it interesting and fun and add story. And then make sure that reflective and that action piece is there, I think is the way moving forward for online education.
That's incredible that that's increased by 300% during COVID. That's amazing. Yeah, and I think that your website, I mean, the little I've spent on it is exactly that. The moment you go on, you start hearing bubbles. It's as if you're underwater. So yeah, that's very neat that you can provide a platform for folks to go on and choose their own adventure and learn from the topics that they're interested in. And I did see that one of the advertisements on there was that you could actually like drive your own remotely operated vehicle, which I know is some of the things that Ocean Networks Canada works a lot on. So I'd like to ask Kate, how can deep sea research address pressing ocean conservation issues? So all the research that Ocean Networks Canada does, and how can that inform both local, national, and then also international ocean policy?
Well, that's a big question. I'll see if I can in a concise time. But as you've described, we operate remotely operated vehicles, and we actually have vehicles that are driven by scientists in Germany on the seaboard and the West Coast. But I'd like to just group them into a couple big buckets. We captured real-time data 24/7. It's open data. Anyone can go and access the data and the data product. But they're for understanding climate change. So, for example, we're monitoring large parts of the Pacific Ocean, the Salish Sea, and now community observatories around a lot of the communities in Canada. And it's helping us get a baseline understanding how the ocean is changing and the climate change. Big example is we were able to determine that the coastal waters of British Columbia were heavily impacted by the warm blob. That was a 2-degree C warming in the Pacific that impacted the economy, an increased drought, it had a huge impact on our world. But we also were able to assess that impact. We also monitor ocean acidification, particularly in places where there's shellfish aquaculture. We work with the Oceanwise on collecting samples so they can do their research on plastic. We also are working hard at trying to partner with Oceanwise on monitoring marine mammals. So that's the understanding part. We need to know what the issues are in order to address them. And then we're working on data products for adaptation in terms of climate change adaptation, which is part of, it's how do you adapt to keep protecting and conserving our ocean. That's issues like storm surge impacts. So those kinds of things we're working on to see if we can get information to people so they can make their own decisions. We're also working on a new project on negative emission technologies. We now know in the ocean, using the ocean for negative emissions. We know we're going to have to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, and one of the biggest reservoirs is in the ocean. There's a lot of detail about that, so I won't jump into the details. But if you want to learn more, you can go to solidcarbon.ca to learn more about that new technology. And Mia touched on something. She was our first junior science ambassador. She did a fantastic job. She set the stage for everyone else to be successful. She was able to set the rules. And so she was part of connecting with the community, as she's mentioned. So we provide the technology, and we have a team that works with youth in order to understand technology and understand how they can gather their own data. So we have a lot more communities on all the coasts now, Labrador and in Maritimes, where we're usually empowering communities to gather their own data to understand climate change or marine mammals, or just simply to understand science and technology, to become more literate and to become part of the technological world. I just have two more pieces I just want to touch on. In terms of remotely operated vehicle, so we have to use those to maintain our infrastructure. That's in up to 3 kilometers of water. And so we go through the water column many times as we go up and down the ship. And so one of the areas that's very little known in the ocean, it's called the mesopelagic zone. It's that zone where the light starts to diminish all the way down to 1 kilometer. So now we have a huge amount of data, video data, of that. Some people call it the twilight zone. So that's a new area. We're trying to discover just what's there in order to observe it. So some people are using that data for that new purpose. And then just touching on what Betty was talking about, we also have an artist in residence program, and our latest artist actually combines data with visualizations to really bring life to the impact humans have on the ocean, so that people know that better. And that's the kind of piece that's really helpful, not only in art, but in movie. So that's the kind of things we're doing, and we're hoping to help Fisheries and Oceans Canada expand the monitoring of the marine protected areas as they get expanded under the leadership of the current government.
That's incredible. That's a lot of things. And I think that what really resonated with me and all that was just the number of collaborations that you have with various folks in the different, cross-sectorial work that you do. And I think that speaks a lot to what we're discussing here on the panel. And then, also just in the way that I think a lot of people on this panel, which is really neat and emphasizes your work that you're doing across sectors. Thanks, Kate. I think it's so important, and we've been speaking about this quite a lot throughout our event today. When we're engaging people in ocean stewardship, we have to go beyond just the people that we regularly engage with. So I think when we talk about ocean conservation and ocean stewardship, we're often talking about West Coast and East Coast, but we really need to talk about engaging folks all across Canada, including up north, landlocked communities, rural communities. So I'd like to ask Mia, in your experience, what are some of the best ways to effectively engage youth and communities in ocean stewardship?
Thank you for the question, Jessica. That is such a great question, because I know a lot of researchers, scientists, and even just people in general down south who just want to know that information. And for me, from my perspective, it's very simple. Being able to be a part of INGRID, where we hosted and worked with youth in all these different communities all across the Arctic. A big thing so we went into these communities where we did these workshops, not with the question of, or the statement of, we are here to help you, we are coming to tell you what to do. We went into these communities asking, what help do you need? What do you need us to do? What can we do? We never go in saying, here's how we're going to help you. We go in with, well, how do you want this help? So a big thing in these workshops with these youth that we ask them is, how do you want to be engaged? How do you want this to happen? And the biggest thing, and I know I might not touch on innovation or stewardship in this topic, but a big thing that not a lot of Southerners or researchers who were not from the Arctic, a big thing that they didn't think about was being human first. Come to our community, tell us who you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Make a joke, be human first before you're a scientist or before you're a researcher or before you're a marine biologist. And have an open mind. I think the biggest thing about, innovation and science and ocean and all these big, huge topics is you have a tunnel vision. And I think the biggest thing is having an open mind, especially if you're going to come up to the north, born and raised in the north. People have a lot of, perceptions and a lot of perspectives and a lot of thoughts of the Arctic, but you can't express that unless you've actually physically been there and you've talked with the people and you've seen their way of life. And so I think the biggest thing that I've always want to get out there is just be human first. We're all human. You have a name. You have a place that you were born, and you don't have to come into the community saying, oh, well, this is what I want to do. This is the research, and here's how you can help me. Just relax and have an open mind, and I think that's the biggest thing. And another huge thing, especially from my perspective, being born and raised here in Nunavut, where, we have the highest dropout rates, we have the worst education rate, all these bad things about education. Me personally, growing up, I thought I couldn't be involved in science. I thought I couldn't do research. I thought I wasn't smart enough only because I'm from Nunavut. And so it's really sad, but the sadder part is there are a lot of youth in Nunavut who are like that. A lot of youth who have that same thought of, oh, well, maybe I'm not smart enough, and, oh, I didn't go to biology class, or, anything like that. It's a lot on a youth's brain. So educating them, coming into the community, not with the mindset of, oh, well, everyone knows what I'm going to talk about. Everyone knows about the ocean. Everyone knows about innovation and stewardship, and not everyone does. And that's not a bad thing. So coming into the community and educating us, telling us why the ocean is, getting more acidified, why the sea levels are rising, why it's important to protect and work with the ocean. And so I think I feel I've done that a lot, and that's why I love doing things like this, where I do my research, I gain my knowledge, but I also bring that back to the community. So being able to not only teach people, but also learn from the people you're working with is a very big thing. Educating, but also learning at the same time. And like I had mentioned earlier, what Iqaluit is so great for is take time to listen to what they want to do, not coming here and saying, well, here's what I want to do. Well, what about me? You're coming into this community, you're working with this community, whether it be virtually, in person, but this is their community. This is where they live, and ask them what they want to do and how they want to go about a healthier ocean or go about anything like that. So, and so if you can get into the community, and I mean, hopefully after all of this passes, If you can get into the community, hold an open house. You know, just get a venue, tell them what you're there for, how they can help you. And a big thing that a lot of people don't think about is the traditional foods. We have a lot of traditional foods, traditional, caribou and fish and ways that we eat it. So if you do hold an open house, bring traditional food. Showing the community that you respect them and that you want to take the time and you have the patience for it is a huge thing for the community to realize, because there are a lot of researchers and a lot of years where researchers did come into the community and say, well, here, we want you to help us in this way. You are going to help us. And there was no connection. There was no human feeling with it. And so having that trust that you as a researcher or you as someone who is from out of town is beyond words, and I can't even explain it. And because I've felt this personally, I've experienced this personally, where researchers or people from down south come, and you can tell when they have that passion or that motivation. So just coming in with that and showing who you really are, face-to-face interactions and hands-on activities. And another weird thing is, especially in Nunavut, we have every single community has a Facebook group. We have a Cambridge Bay News Facebook group. And people always ask, what's the easiest way to get in contact? How do I contact the community? And they think it's the Hamlet or through mail or all these different things. Facebook. Facebook is such a happening. I know every single community has that. So writing a little blurb about who you are on Facebook, about who you or your group is and why you're there and why you think it's important, but also realizing why or how can it be important to the community? How can you work with the community? So yeah, I think it all just comes back to being human and having that pure motivation and dedication to actually learn from and teach the community is a really, really big reason or a really big thing that you can do to be working effectively with youth and communities.
Amazing. Thanks, Mia. I feel like I can just listen to you forever. You start talking and I learn so much. So thank you for sharing all of that.
And I feel like I'm just blabbing.
Not at all. And I think it's a good reminder, especially with COVID and the fact that we're all behind screens a lot of the time. I think we forget that we are all human. So I really appreciate that in this reminder of, that we're all connected. And I hope that this event in general has reminded everyone that we are connected to each other. Everything is so intertwined, and we're all connected to the ocean wherever we are, and we all can do something in order to protect the ocean. So I just want to give a really big thank you to Dr. Ingrid Waldron for doing our keynote, and to all of our panelists. This has been a great deal to listen to all of your perspectives, and I think you've given myself, and I'm sure everyone who's listening, a lot to think about and a lot to go back and do some more research and do some more learning and then sharing with our communities. So I'm going to pass this off to Julia to wrap us up, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you everyone for joining us. We're so privileged to be able to have such an incredible panel join us for World Oceans Day. And normally this would be an event that would take place in person, but it's really exciting that we have people from all over the world with us right now. Because we're not in person, it's kind of an awesome side note and a little extra that we get because of COVID. So, there's always a nice silver lining. So here I have some resources and kind of next steps, some education pieces, and some links to a couple of the different things that we mentioned, that Ingrid mentioned, and that other folks mentioned. I know there were people asking questions about a lot of the other kind of amazing work that everyone's doing, and looking for links to all of that stuff as well. So we will send that out to everyone who participated. Have your email. So that'll go out with this stuff. And then we just really encourage you all to kind of keep these thoughts at the forefront of your mind over the next weeks, months, years, and as you kind of continue in your relationship with the ocean and in your relationship with everyone around you. Thank you so much for joining us. Shoreline Cleanup has a couple more things happening for World Oceans Month. We have a panel in French if anyone is a French speaker and feels more comfortable kind of tuning in French, talking about a plastic-free Saint Laurent River and just a general area. Can't say more myself because I don't speak French, but we have a lot more going on as well. So check out our social media channels to learn about that stuff. But yeah, thank you everyone. It looks like we have a couple of questions, so I'll stick around and kind of answer those over the chat. But everyone will be signing off now. And please feel free to email myself or Jessica or any of the panelists if you have more questions as well. And I can pop our email addresses into the Q&A section there or into the chat. So I'm just gonna turn off my video and turn off my mic and let everyone kind of leave as they will. And answer a couple more questions, but thank you all so much for attending.
Yay. Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone. Happy World Oceans Day.